Welcome to today's webinar. The topic for today is better pureed meals with RoboCoupe. My name is Tina Burns and I will facilitate today's webinar. If you have questions during today's presentation, log into your YouTube account and use the chat feature. Or if you don't have a YouTube account, use the Google form that was in the invite to send your questions to our team. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the live Q&A and at the end of the presentation. If we do not get to your question in time, we will make sure we respond by email. Please note that the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information, but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon this information without first consulting with qualified legal counsel. This webinar will be recorded. Today's webinar will be presented by Mirkovich Associates. Mirkovich is our local manufacturer's representative for RoboCoupe. I'd like to start out by introducing Richard Sternard. Richard has a degree in restaurant management and 14 years in management and operations. Richard is the principal of Mirkovich Associates. And prior to coming to Mirkovich, Richard worked in food service equipment sales and manufacturing. Next, I'd like you to meet Dave DeBroth. Dave is a classically French-trained chef with 20 years of operations experience, including 7 years in healthcare food service. Dave has been the corporate chef for Mirkovich Associates for 7 years. All right. Dave, take it away.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go through many topics and then also have a video at the end, and we will take questions after the video at the very end. It is interactive. Please feel free to type in if you like, but know that we will have a Q&A section at the end after the videos. The things that we're going to cover today is Blixer is going to be the big part of it. Reason we're covering the Blixer so deeply is because it helps in so many facets of the modified diets, including getting to different textures inside of the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, which some know as IDDSI. We call it IDSI. So we will talk about how Blixer and other pieces get to IDSI. We'll talk about the difference between a cutter and a Blixer to help better understand what a Blixer does, what a cutter does. We'll also talk about alternative methods such as blenders, immersion blenders, or drink mixers. Show and tell. We'll have videos on corn tests. We'll compare different machinery. We'll talk about speed, replacement costs, Blixers versus blenders, and then of course proteins. We will focus on level 5. That is the orange level in the color coding known as minced and moist for the food. We will also hit on the soft and bite size, which is level 6, which is blue, mainly because those two textures are pretty technical in size on how to hit. We'll go through sizing the machines. We'll have some different examples. We'll talk about features, advantages, and benefits. Maintenance, which is also important. That's one place that we will definitely cover big time. The CL50 Gourmet, because the Gourmet can do a Brunoise cut, which really helps us get to that IDSI level 5 cut. The Gourmet we will touch on big. We'll have some videos, and then we'll do questions. So what is a Blixer? Let's start there. A Blixer is what it sounds like. It's a blender and a mixer. This is a very innovative piece of machinery for healthcare. And where it is unique is you'll see in the second picture here, there is what looks like a handle and a blade sticking down. That actually goes into the bowl so that when you rotate that around, it takes the food off the sides of that high bowl so that it goes back down into the blade. We're going to cover the blade here on the next slide, please. One more, please. And now we can cover the blades as we talk about the difference between the cutter and the blixer. So one of them is RPMs. Blixer has a much higher revolution per minute at 3,600, and that's because we really need to puree product down. That includes proteins, which has the protein fibers to it, much harder to get through. So we need a higher RPM in order to get through fibers such as that. The blade is fine and serrated, and it's also reversed, which we have a video at the end to show you, versus the cutter, which is more smooth and a normal sharpening. The blade shape is flat on a blixer compared to the cutter, or the curved on the cutter, I should say. And then also the hub. We talked a little bit about how the hub, or the bowl itself, is much higher so that it's more room for the food to move around inside of there, which Chef Dave will show in the corn test at the end. And then, of course, the blixer arm that we mentioned, which is that little paddle that goes down into the bowl to move the food around, so it comes off of the sides and purees oh so nicely. The next page, thank you. This shows a difference between a cutter on the left and the blixer on the right. On the left side, you'll notice how there are little kernels of cooked rice still on the side of the bowl there, above what was pureed in the left side picture. And on the right side, you'll see that the blixer was able to puree that cooked rice so much better. We will show a little bit later how even with a blixer, doing dry rice actually can help you out quite a bit. And before anybody asks, I'm not sure why somebody wrote rice in German on here in RIS, but they did. So there you go. Dave, you want to talk a little bit about the rice that you'll be doing on the next one?
Yeah, so the big point of that last slide is that the when you have the cutter system, it's not designed to puree something. By the time you get it down to a pureed consistency, you've added so much liquid in there that now you have to add a thickener, and now you've really reduced the nutrition value of that product. With the rice, in the blixer, I use very little liquid. So when we finish that product, it doesn't have a whole lot added to it. So we don't have to make up nutrition somewhere else, or add protein powders, or add up, something else back into the mix. And then, like Richard was saying, the size of that hub in the center that you see right now, the one on the left is a cutter, which is a very short little hub, I guess you would call it. On the right, it's much deeper. So we can get that liquid in there without sloshing it down into the bearings, and then we have maintenance issues.
That's correct. And that's a big reason why we see here this note on this slide that says never to overfill. The video later will show the max fill line on the blade itself. But sometimes we run into what people consider to be sizing issues, when actually it's a properly sized unit for the volume of modified diets or IDSI diets that you're doing for your facility. Rather, the problem is that people are overfilling the blixer, which doesn't allow the food any room to move inside of there, which can burn out a motor, it could burn out gears, cause havoc to your machinery. That gets blamed on being improperly sized when actually it's being improperly filled. We have a little bit more on that a little bit later. So the next slide here does show a bit more about the high hub and where to fill to on a R2 versus a blixer. So an R2 cutter, you have a bit of a wider bowl and a little bit lower of a fill line, and then on the blixer, it's a higher hub or a higher bowl that we were talking about with a bit more of a fill line. And in this case, a blixer 3 of 9 cups of liquid, or the rice that we were talking about. The next slide, please. I do believe actually was a duplicate slide. Somehow that happened. So I believe we have to go to the next slide.
One more.
Yep. There we go. Thank you. So yes, alternative methods. So we've talked about cutters, and we've talked about blixers, and we've talked about the advantages of blixers to get to that pureed and modified diet. There are other options out there. These really are more dependent upon, for example, the blender. Are you doing a smaller amount of food? Are you doing different types of food? But with blenders, you need to add water and you need to add liquid or some type of liquid to it, as Dave mentioned. When you add water, you're now serving water. You have lower nutritional content. Not so much that water isn't good for people, but when we're serving them their food, we want their nutritional content. We want them drinking their water. But blenders do have their place inside of facilities. It's that Blixers help get to that modified diet better by using less water or less liquid. With the middle there, with that immersion blender, it looks like a stick mixer known as an immersion blender. That's used in liquids quite a bit. Dave shows that in the video at the end. And then, of course, we have what that last picture is, which is prepackaged foods. And prepackaged foods are quite unpleasant in today's world where we have so many baby boomers are going to be entering different healthcare type facilities. And our tastes and our expectations of food have changed. The food service program of a facility could really be the determining factor of whether somebody's going to be a resident there or not. The food really determines the difference in dignity that the resident has or not. And prepackaged food, as we all know, simply doesn't have the same presentation power and overall experience as our food made in the kitchen from scratch does. A little bit on storage. Chef Dave, you want to talk a little bit on storage?
Yeah, one of the things with prepackaged stuff, there's a couple things that I don't like about it. You don't know it tells you what's in it, but when you're making your own product, if you have a chicken breast and you puree it, it's not getting any added MSG or sodium or sugars or anything else that you don't add to it doesn't go into it. So you know exactly what you're making. And so if you have a low sodium diet, you don't have to make a modification or make some sort of special purchase for that. And then the cost of storing that. Once you get frozen product, then you've got to store it somewhere, and that freezer space is pretty expensive to run. So next slide, please. Next one.
Yeah. So in the next slide, as we're moving over, we're going to talk about show and tell. We can actually go 2 slides right away. Here we are, the corn test. And Dave, you do a video at the end on the corn test. So
yeah, we do
discuss this a little bit.
Yeah, we do like cooked kernel corn out of a can. Basically because of the fiber and the texture of that corn. It's one of the hardest vegetables out there to completely puree down to a acceptable puree for a puree diet. And kind of the point of this, if I can puree corn, I can puree just about any vegetable on the market. Some of these, I mean, you don't even really have to cook some of those vegetables off. If you want to maintain some of the nutrient quality that are in some, you really wouldn't even have to cook it. And especially when you prepare it, it's going to be heated up again. So there's no sense in cooking that twice. So we can actually puree up raw vegetable and then cook it down the road. Next slide.
So one of the things that we do when a representative from RoboCoupe, such as ourselves, comes out and does a live demo for you to show good, better, and best, is we do that corn test, which shows the difference between trying to do it in a blender, mainly by adding some water to it to make it blend up inside the blender, compared to maybe a bowl processor or a cutter, compared to the actual Blixer to show the difference. And Dave does have a video at the end to show the true difference of the Blixer with the corn. And part of that is the speed. Oh, yep. Thanks. Next. Yep. Part of that is the speed. So it's going to be faster than most recipes than the blender on. I mean, with most recipes, it is going to be faster. With a blender, you may also need a tool. Some blenders need that food stick that you see there in order for the food to move around inside of the blender. Some have wave action, which really helps inside of a blender to get it moving around. And blenders, as far as processing proteins inside of a blender, that's very tough. To say that it cannot be done would be a fair statement because it's really going to burn out motors on blenders very, very fast. Most recipes, including proteins inside of a Blixer, are done in less than 2 minutes on that.
Yeah, the big thing on the blenders is they'll get you started, but like Richard said, you have to add so much liquid that by the time you get them done, they're reduced to nothing. Plus the burnout on those motors, unless you've got the most talented staff, and nobody does anymore. We used to have a backup blender in one of the places I worked in because every 6 months you just guaranteed it would burn out on you. Whereas something like a Blixer, I've seen them in the market for 10, 20 years. They just don't burn out because they're just so powerful. So next one's fine. And that goes to the same thing I was mentioning. Some blender brands only last a year. Some don't even make it half a year. It's just they're underpowered for what they're used for. And so the Blixer really takes up a lot of that workload.
And to Dave's point, a properly sized RoboCoupe, according to RoboCoupe's own metrics, should have an ROI within about 6 months. And those should last you, properly sized, used properly, maintained properly, no less than 7 years, and definitely over a decade. We've seen them go even further than that, closer to 20 years, like Dave said. So somewhere between 7, 12, 15 years, properly sized, properly maintained, RoboCoupe doing the proper procedures is going to last you plenty of time so that your facility is making money off of it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a Blixer versus a blender in this case. So with the blender, what we see here is the food inside there, and you really need to add liquid just to get that blender going, where on the right side you see the Blixer, and there was no liquids needed there to get that pureed down to a pureed level 4, or otherwise known as green in ITSE texture. So that's a nice sample showing how that works. Next page, please. And here's a 60-second runtime of dried. Dave, I do believe, were these garbanzo beans?
I believe so, yeah. Drained garbanzo.
Yep. And if you noticed on the left side, there was 4 ounces of water that was added, where on the left side, there was half. There was only 2 ounces added to get to a little bit nicer of a desired texture that they wanted to have. Can be done without water, but any water you decide to add is what you decide to add, and it's far less than what you have to add. Next slide, please.
I think it's the same product, just 30 seconds more. With the Blixer not adding any more water on the right-hand side, it's just run a little bit longer, and you get that full puree out of it. So you go to the next one, Tina. So this is ham in a blender. We talked about not picking up the product just because there's like the peas, it doesn't really move them around. This is a blender that's been pulsed with a chunk of ham in it, and it's pointless to even run it because it doesn't do anything. You don't get anything broken down, so you'd have to cut it down into pieces before you added it. Here in the Blixer, we put it in a couple pulses, get you down to already to that to the chopped level. And if we keep running that, we can have all the way down to a ground level that we could use for minced and moist. And I think we'll get into that next slide. Yeah, Richard?
Yep, so the ITSE here at level 5, getting to minced and moist. This is the pre-cooked protein. Here on the next slide, it shows the prepared and cooked protein. And this is really where, as it says, RoboCoupe excels, because you cook this protein and then you chill it down, and we can start running it through the RoboCoupe units to start getting to what we see here on the next side, which is the level 5. And this one is the chicken product. You see a 30-second versus 6-second versus 9-second. 12 seconds is where you really start to see the product fit through the fork tine. And the fork tine, Chef Dave and I have measured, the average is about 4 millimeters. So at 3 millimeters, we're hitting the ITSE level 5 minced and moist regulation. And of course, molds here, which really helps add the dignity to the resident who is eating. On the next slide, we see the steak. Same situation of where we get to the point where it's starting to pass that fork test, where it fits through the fork tines, to make sure that we are at that level 5 or orange in ITSE, which is minced and moist. So, Dave, you want to take a little bit more on ITSE and level 5 here on the next slide?
Yeah, go on to the next one. There you go. This is just spells out what the pictures showed you: the 3-second, 6-second, 9-second runtime with the I guess the development of ITSE, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of what your textures mean. When I was in operations, we had chopped, ground, pureed, and whatever prep cook was making it that day, whatever he considered to be chopped, ground, pureed consistency is what we went with, because there was no guideline, no standardization. What was interesting back then, we would do something like the Blixer. We would pulse that ham or that chicken for 3 seconds, then take that out as our chop, run it 3 or 6 more seconds, take our grounds out, and then add a little bit of liquid for purees and go down the road with this. But it kind of shows you, I think it says here, 15 to 21 seconds, and you've got yourself a pureed, perfectly pureed. Let's go on to the next one.
So some sizing tips. On the next slide here, we'll see that the 4 ounce is the most common of the sizing tips for portions inside of healthcare when it comes to modified diets. 4 ounce, a half a cup, otherwise known as 112 grams, many times just averaged out to 100 grams, with the 12 grams not being that big of a difference. But here are some common utensils in the kitchen that helps to get to that 4 ounce bowl or that 4 ounce portion. But where that's really important is on the next slide. We talked a bit about putting too much product inside of your Blixer, inside of your equipment. Here's a situation where there's not enough. We can undersize units. There can also be oversized units. And that's why having the conversations about the portion sizing and how many portions you're doing per serving is so important about sizing your unit. Because here, in this Blixer 3, if we put this one portion size in there and turn it on, it's not going to puree or Blix up the rice, because there's not enough product in there to get moving around and get the blades kicking it up with those inverted blades. Dave, you want to add a bit to that? It is an important point.
Yeah, the next page I'll cover it here. So the minimum amount to process, like I said, it has to cover both blades. Well, if you only have one pureed diet in your census at the time, a good workaround for that is to maybe make 3 or 4 chicken breasts in one day. And as long as you cook it correctly, chill it correctly, and process it correctly and store it, we could make 3 or 4 portions of chicken, knowing that I'm going to serve chicken in the next 5 days 3 more times. So I can actually make that pureed chicken, mold it, have it in the fridge for a convenience factor. Or if you wanted to make 20 and freeze them, and as long as you're doing it correctly and storing correctly, you can always have that you could have a rack in your freezer that's nothing but pureed meals for just grab and go and put them together quickly. So, and since your census changes daily, I'd rather oversize you than undersize you. We do make a Blixer too that holds about 2 pieces of something. And unless you're making your own baby food for one baby, it's kind of it's underkill. So we would definitely want to oversize to some degree, but not price you out of a new car, right?
Right. Well, and to that point, Dave, with the baby boomers coming, because the Roku and the Blixers and this equipment can last so long, we need to take a look at what the projection of healthcare is going to be. With the baby boomers coming, you might be doing 15 modified meals today, but your projection in 7, 10, 12 years is that's going to go up to 20 modified diets. Well, since you're going to have this for that long, we might as well size it to make sure that it's not undersized, but yet we're not oversizing it either. So we need to take a look at the projection of healthcare, where you're going, to make sure it's properly sized. This slide here talks a bit about the max line. You'll actually see right there, that is the max line that will show in the video. This is the most amount of product that should fit in there. You should see that top nub of the blade sticking out of the product. If that top nub is ever covered and you can't see it, all it is product all the way across, it's overfilled. And that's Blixers, cutters, blenders, anything at all. Well, not so much blenders, but Blixers and cutters for sure. If you're over the top of that, you are absolutely overfilling your unit. The next slide here actually shows the sizing guide that is used with Robocoup to help figure out which Blixer is the best size for you based off of the 4 ounce portions. And again, the one thing that we need to take into consideration here is you might be doing, say, 35 4 ounce portions a day, which says a Blixer 6 probably good for you. But then you realize that you have the baby boomers coming, and you could easily be at 52 within the next couple of years, well, maybe we want to take a look at a Blixer 10 or even a Blixer 15 just to make sure that you are investing for the future of your facility. Thank you. So here we talk a bit about the mini mixer. Now, Dave had mentioned the Blixer 2. There's also the mini mixer. Mini mixers, really, if you're doing like one a day. And there's ways to find to get around that. But mini mixer does fit a portion in the product, or in the market, I should say. But it'll be an expensive fix for you. So the next slide, we are showing here the blade height and the differences in sizes. As we start to size up your Blixer from a Blixer 2 to a Blixer 3, we have a difference in blade height. That's so that we have the room to kick the food up and get it moving around and still blended inside of your bowl. The blade height is a very important piece of this. The next slide is a closer up shot of that max fill line that we'll see in the video as well. We never want to go over that max fill line. That is going to cause havoc on your Blixer. Dave, you're doing the video here on this next slide. You're doing the video at the end on the rice powder. Do you want to take this slide before the video?
Yeah, sure. This is just kind of an example to show you how it can pulverize something very hard like dry white converted rice. It's one of the hardest ones to mix up there. And what I've found is that rice powder is a lot easier to make than it is to puree cooked rice, because it gets so gluey and sticky and makes a mess of your machinery. The other part of that too is I'm going to hold up here the Blixer blade that Richard was talking about. There's a little hole at the top, and this is part of the cleaning mechanism. This top actually comes off. There's a tool that goes in the bottom here, and I can take this apart for cleaning. I talk about it like a lot, but if these are not taken apart and cleaned, same as the bell housing on your immersion blender, it gets food particles stuck into it, which not only is going to be an allergen or a cross-contamination issue, but if I'm doing a ricotta filling and I leave that ricotta in there, it's going to take about 48 hours to start stinking up the kitchen and getting people sick. So this needs to be taken apart and cleaned. Everything on RoboCoupe is designed to be taken apart, and I'll cover that in a little bit on one of the next slides.
Mm-hmm. So with that rice, with the Blixer 3 that we've been talking about, we can get about 4.5 pounds of rice done in 2 minutes. That takes care of most facilities. That's a good amount of rice in a very quick time. The next slide talks a bit more about the pro tips that we've talked about. And really, we're going back to that fill line. We have to make sure that we leave room inside the bowl for the food to move around. We keep saying that because it is so important. You do have products like rice, which is a lot of air, those tiny little kernels with air in between it. But then you have other products that, based on their size and their shape and their density, we have to make sure that we keep off underneath that fill line. So here in the application of healthcare, Dave, you have some nice presentation at the end on plated up stuff. Would you like to take the next couple of slides?
Sure. Go one more team. Yeah, so the better presentation, that's kind of what we're going for with all this stuff. It's like when I was in healthcare, I mean, there was a couple places I worked at where all we had was a melamine tri-sectional plate, and we took ice cream scoopers and just tried to do our best because we didn't have access to some of this stuff. You can find molds on Amazon now, right? Direct supply. Somebody can get you this stuff anywhere. So there's no reason to not have it. The molds are very nice. They're kind of fun to play with. And if you see it plated up, we'll show you at the end here with a plated up molded food versus just a dump and scoop. It adds so much dignity to a meal for your residents. And as they age, and most of the places I've been at, dinner's their social hour. That's what they look forward to all day. And if you sit down and all you have is a 3-sectional plate with a bunch of ice cream scoops and plopped on there with gravy, it takes the wind out of your day. So try to make it a little more exciting, a little more fun for everybody. Yeah, and so let's kind of go one more, Tina. I think that was it on that one. But definitely, it just adds the dignity to their life and all the effort we put in day to day. Why not just finish it that little bit extra?
Yeah. As Dave mentioned, that a lot of the times the dining time is their social time and the time that they look for, and to give the residents that dignity is a really nice touch that brings people to the facility and keeps them there, quite honestly. So with some of the features and advantages and different pieces that you can get with the Blixer, we're coming back to the Blixer arm here. The important part to that is that it gets the food off of the size. It has a specific blade and bowl shape adapted for the basically what the consistent emulsion is what you need to have out of there. The high hub helps make sure that food all gets around, and the 3600 RPM is the standard speed to help get through all of the food fibers that we need to get to. That homogeneous texture, again, also known as the consistent emulsion, is what provides that consistency and that safety for your residents. On the next slide here, we talk a bit more about the normal and the texture modified textures, I should say. Raw ingredients, again, do not need liquid. You could do cooked ingredients in there, especially if they're chilled, that helps. And then the liquid, if you need to add it at all, it's minimal if you basically want to add it for the brand of the food that you're serving to your residents. And this is really gonna stretch the ability of your menu inside of your facility and allow you to provide more and different products to your residents. And then on the next slide here, we talk about sanitation. The really nice part and what makes this NSF is that on this Blixer blade, it all comes apart into 3 different pieces so that it can be cleaned and then reassembled and used again. This keeps the bacteria out of the little nooks and crannies. This is a really nice feature from RoboCoupe. Dave, anything on that to add? This is a big point on it, is the sanitation, the NSF pass, and keeping it clean.
Yeah, and that's the case with everything in the kitchen, obviously. Could you highlight my screen, Erica? So pretty much on RoboCoupe, if it looks like it comes apart, it comes apart. So the lid assembly comes apart, all the pieces come out, my gasket around here comes out for cleaning, and even the scraper here comes apart for cleaning, because even in those little spots like that, I'll get some kind of crumb and some sort of gook up inside there, and it will make a mess. If we don't clean it out, we're going to get somebody sick, and we don't want to do that. And they all go together really easily. But the big thing with RoboCoupe, like I said, if it looks like it comes apart for cleaning, it usually does.
Mm-hmm. So the important part here is we've seen facilities that buy residential pieces of equipment to try to make all of this happen. They might stop off at Walmart or Target because it's an inexpensive piece that they could pick up and just replace as needed. The problem with that is that it's not NSF approved because it doesn't come apart like Chef Dave just showed for cleaning. It doesn't have the high RPMs to be able to handle to get through the product that we need to get through inside of our industrial kitchen. These are commercial kitchens for these residents. Just because they're residing there doesn't mean that we're using residential pieces of equipment to serve them. There's simply too many people. The direct drive induction motor is one of the things that makes it an industrial piece of equipment. As we see the green circle around there, the shaft that comes out is directly driven into the motor. So that motor goes, that shaft goes, and there's fewer pieces to break. It's more powerful going around. It gets through the product much, much faster. The stainless steel motor shaft helps make sure that we don't rust out, much stronger, much more durable. And then, of course, we have the high bowl again to prevent ingredients from spilling over, causing a mess, causing problems with the electronics. The electronics on the RoboCoupe are completely enclosed to help keep from that happening as well. Basically, it's just built to last inside of your kitchen, which is what we'll see on the next page, on the next slide here. So your performance, as you read through this, you'll notice that basically it's strong and it's fast. It's built to last inside of that kitchen. On the next one down, the easy menu, you have, you have the easy menu. That's your menu diversity. So you can do so many more things off of your menu to serve your residents. High level of sanitation, it's going to keep it safe. It's going to keep it safe for your employees who are using the unit. It's going to keep it safe with the product that's being served to your residents. And then, of course, the robustness, another way of saying that it's durable, able to last inside of that unit. So thank you, Tina. And the next slide is going to be one of the more important places to talk about. And this is what we really emphasize with any piece of equipment, but especially one used as much as Robocoo, is in the use and the maintenance. So one of the big questions that we always get is it dishwasher safe? Your aluminum, your plastic parts, sure. We always recommend, though, that you hand wash it. It's safer. It's not nearly as caustic. That's why a lot of this stuff stays out of the dishwashers, because dishwashers use very caustic chemicals that can eat away at the product and reduce its lifespan. So hand washing is going to allow it to last much, much longer. And then, of course, the removable parts so that we can get the bacteria out of all those little nooks and crannies. The next page here talks a bit more about what Chef Dave was talking about, how the cleaning tool, you can see the long shaft there that goes into the blade, allows it to come apart so that that can be cleaned. That keeps it NSF approved so that we get the bacteria out of the little spots where there may be where bacteria might be able to get into, that if you're not taking apart, that bacteria can expand and then end up in the food when you go to use the unit. Dave, that's another very important piece right there. I know you touched on it a bit before, but we should hit it one more time.
Yeah, as the blixers go up in size, the components actually change how they look. So if I get a larger blixer, maybe in the blixer 5 or 6 size, this turns into a stainless steel blade that has collars on it that basically, as it goes up, you can adjust the blade height on the blade itself. So all those extra pieces in that unit, let me grab one for you. So all those different collars you can see on here, every one of these lines is a collar. I can adjust this blade up or down to pick up all my food, but that's also more places for things to get into, you know? So I actually tell a horror story of going to a high-end Italian restaurant locally to do training on this unit that had been installed probably for 2 months. They'd been using it and they never knew it came apart. And so we actually put it on the machine to take it apart. They'd been using it for their cannoli filling and all sorts of stuff. And as soon as I unlocked it, all the gunk started leaking out. So it's critical. It's got to be taken care of. And that's something, like Richard said, we pound over in training, probably more than the actual use of the machine.
Yep. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the wearable parts, because that blade does scrape against the edge of the unit and it's also getting friction from the food. Make sure that you're checking that and that it's not corroding away, so that if you ever start to notice that food starts to hold on to the side of that bowl, that would be a time when this needs to be in place. The blades, Dave and I have talked about a bit. The last picture on here, though, the bottom one with the red arrow showing the seal, that is a piece that helps keep, if something would overflow, keep the liquid from getting into the motor base. On this very last bottom picture with the red arrow shows that seal. That should be replaced every 6 months or so, depending on the volume that you're doing. That might vary. Maybe you're doing a lot and it wears away, and you need to replace it more often. Maybe you're not doing nearly as much product, and it'll last you a little bit longer than 6 months. Also, based on what you clean it with, non-caustic type cleaning will help maintain that seal, where a caustic cleaner will eat away at that seal much, much faster. So the CL50 Gourmet, this is a very important piece of equipment from Robocoo, because this is the one that can do the brunoise cut. That's the cut that's going to get down to that very fine minced and moist level 5, also known as orange for food in ITSE, that really small cut. Dave, you want to cover a little bit about how this gets there?
Yeah, actually, I think we show it in the video. It's going to be a lot easier to explain. But the spindle on the right-hand side, every time that blade comes around and makes a cut, that spindle turns 45 degrees. So when the blade comes back around, what would typically be a julienne cut coming across Now that product is spun, so when it comes across again, it actually finishes the cut and makes that fine brunoise. I've worked in many French restaurants and high-end restaurants where we think we're doing fine brunoise, and it's very hard to get that dialed in. And this is people who are classically trained and done it for 10, 15 years. You're going to be hard-pressed to find some kid off in a high school that's going to understand what brunoise is and going to nail it every time. So this is a very exact way to get that size to where we need it.
Yep. So I'm sure all of you have already seen the IDSI inverted pyramid chart that you're seeing here right in front of you. Here's the fork tine test that we've been talking about in that number 5, minced and moist. And the big point to that there is what Dave mentioned that we'll also see here on the next slide, which is that consistency. Not only is it a consistent product that you're putting out that your residents they're expecting the same thing over and over and over again. That same quality is what I mean, but also that same size to make sure that they're safe, that if this is what they need to be consuming at this level 5, that they're doing it every single time. To get down to this small of a chop by hand, especially the more and more of the meals that you need to provide this for, just gets harder and harder to do it consistently by hand. That's where the CL50 RoboCoupe, the food processor, is really going to excel in providing that for your residents. So now we're at the exciting part of the presentation. We're going to watch some videos which go through a lot of what we talked about, and then we'll be happy to take questions at the end. Hi, Richard Sternard with Mirkovich Associates here at Direct Supply.
Hi, I'm Chef Dave with Mirkovich Associates, and we're going to talk about Blixers today.
Yep. One of the things that Blixers are used so well for is to break down corn to a puree. Corn is a very tough product. It is not easy to get to a puree. A couple of things that Blixers do to get there is we have the inverted blade. We have one blade facing up, we have another blade facing down, and this moves product inside the bowl so that it can blend really well, along with the serrated blade to cut through it. We also have a max fill line right here that you should not fill product past. And there is a situation where you could have too little product in a unit that might be too big. We can talk about that when we get to sizing. Chef Dave is going to show you how a Blixer purees corn so well, along with a couple other features.
So the Blixer unit, one of the unique features, as Richard said, was the inverted blade. We also have a lid with a bowl scraper attached to it. So as we're running product, we can actually spin this blade around and knock the product off the walls of the unit and from the lid and put them back into the mix so we have consistent texture all the way through. So we're going to add our 2 cans of corn. And you'll notice we got 3 buttons on the front of the unit, and the reason for this is typically if I have something like walnuts or almonds, I don't want to pulverize them right away. I want to give them a quick, just a light break apart here. So we just have a pulse feature that's just going to start the breakdown process, and once I'm good, I'll let it go. We can see the puree is right down to a consistency where it's more of a paste or a chowder type consistency. They actually be swallowed in a pureed diet. Hey all, we're going to do some pureed rice flour. One of the main reasons we like to do this before it's cooked is once you cook rice or pasta and start to puree it, it gets so gluey and messy that it's hard to clean the machine, and it's hard to get a good consistent texture. So we're going to load this up, just a couple cups of dry white converted rice. You can use brown rice, it all works about the same. And since we have a consistency that's already the size of a grain, I don't really need to worry about a pulse feature on this. I could just let it rip. And kind of the main point for something like this would be for like a cream of rice breakfast or rice for a stir fry, or even for like a rice pudding we have to have for dessert, is an option for anyone who's on a pureed diet and needs that option. Let's talk IDSE. IDSE is the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative that is trying to get legs going here in the US&A. So we're going to discuss immersion blenders. The ones we have on hand are all the way from this little guy that's a micro mix, good for 1, 2, 3, 4 portions. We have larger units on up to something like this, and even larger if we're doing 30 or 40 modified texture liquids. So your modified liquids are from a just watery thin all the way up to pudding consistency, depending on the level of dysphagia and choking problems we have to deal with. So basically this is just how this works. I've got a little variable speed on here. We're going to start slow so don't throw a bunch of juice around. We've got your standard thickener. On the back of most thickening containers there's going to be measurements and formulas. Start as a guideline, but always take a 5 to 10 minute pause after you've thickened it to let it continue to thicken. So our first level after being regular juice or regular water thin consistency is going to be basically what we call a nectar thick, where it's just a little bit thicker, really hard to notice, but we have some syringe tests that we're going to show you a little bit later how we do that to make sure we have the right consistency for the right diet. So after we get the first one, it's a little foamy on top, but it is a little bit thicker, not a lot. What we want to do next is get to more of a honey consistency. So I'm going to start going a little bit further. Adding about another tablespoon of thickener. A little shot more. Like I was saying, if you have more than just the 1 or 2 orders a day you have to have. I used to work at a place where we were making 4 or 5 gallons of cranberry juice and lemonade every 3 days because we had so many people on choking problems. So we get to our more of a honey consistency, and as I said, as this sits, it will thicken up a little bit more. So we want to make sure we're not overdoing it, or you're going to have to go back in and thicken it up. I did some testing yesterday, and after about 20 minutes, it was still changing its texture on me. And the thickener and the food starch, it really becomes a nutritional issue when you get into food. For the most part, when we're looking at liquids, we are really focused on hydration. As long as we can keep our residents and our infants hydrated, that is the key feature on the beverages. The food, we can talk a little bit more about that in a second, but here we're at a consistency where we're starting to hit almost, I guess it'd be closer towards gravy, where it's going to start to notice to be really thick. One step further than this and it's going to be more of a pudding consistency, and we really can't even measure it with the syringe concept. What you do is just plunk it up in a spoon, and if it falls off the spoon, keep its shape. That's kind of where you're at, and it's the right consistency. We can start to see we get some real thickness developing on that juice where it's starting to come out in clumps. As I let this sit 5 or 10 more minutes, we will have pretty much a pudding here. And that's kind of what we're looking for depending on the needs of your establishment. So with the IDSE program, there's a color associated with each beverage here. And this is pretty much a clear, but I like the blue as a nice color. And then it goes into black, and then red, and yellow, and green. And as you can see, my 3 different consistencies from product that was made yesterday, and let it sit for a while. It does thicken up as it sits, so that's the key on that one. So the syringe test is basically done with one of these 10 to 12 milliliter syringes. And so what we do is we take our thickened juice, we're gonna pull up 10 milliliters out of here, and I'm gonna pull the plunger out of the top. And when this one's done being my level 1, I want between 1 and 3 milliliters left in this syringe. That's a drip rate after 10 seconds. This one I want basically between 3 to 7, 3 to 8. This one will barely drop out, and this one I said is the spoon consistency. So if I did it right, I have about 10 milliliters in here. And pretty much what you want right there is that 0 to 3 left in that syringe. See a much slower rate out of that one. Pretty much stops right about 4. So that's kind of, well, that is exactly what I want out of that level of thickened liquids. And so for the pudding check on this pudding thick is, we're gonna pull a spoonful of it up and it's just gonna drop out in one clump. That's kind of what we're looking for right there. So it's one of those that's hard to drink, needs to be eaten with a spoon. We're gonna talk now about the ITSE food textures that we're gonna have to try to achieve. Your standard plate's gonna be pretty much whatever it is my number 7. When I get to a 7 EC, it's gonna be 7 easy to chew. So if I have something like a chicken breast and baked potato, maybe I would do a braised chicken thigh and some mashed potatoes, but eaten with a fork, no knives needed on that one, just a little easier to chew. So the way we achieve some of these textures here is I can pay my cook to sit and dice everything for hours and hours on end, or I can use a food processor. So the cutter machines is gonna be something like this here, where I have a disc with blades on them, and it fits right into the machine there. And then we have a blade with a tapered bottom, and this basically cuts one layer of whatever vegetable I have in here, and then this tapered piece is gonna push it down through the dice grid and create a perfect, what I have here I believe is a 12 by 12. With the ITSE program, they want that to be under 15 millimeter for the level 5, which is pretty much just easy to chew, soft. So we're going to put some carrots in here. And with every unit, you want to put the food against the wall of the hopper that the direction the blade is going. It's going to have much more consistent cut. And the nice part about the food processing equipment too is that if I want to do my soup prep on the same day, I can get a whole lot of food done in a short amount of time. Get our hopper down, kind of lightweight pressure on here. And so if I've got 50 pounds of vegetables, I can pretty much pop those out of here in just a matter of minutes. Just save yourself a ton of time. And the nice part about that too is, you know, that if you're using a 14 millimeter or a 12 millimeter, you don't have to worry about the new prep cook thinking he knows what 14 milliliter looks like. There's no option in this machine. It has to come out that size, or if not a little bit smaller. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the minced and moist level of ITSE. This is where it gets a little more critical and tricky. The guidelines call for a 4 millimeter by 4 millimeter brunoise, if you will. I've worked with a lot of cooks and chefs that couldn't tell me what a brunoise is with a measuring stick. So to think you're going to get that accurate with little Johnny working back behind the prep counter, it's a tricky cut to do. One of the unique features of this very particular machine, I think this is the CL50 Gourmet, is that I can do a brunoise cut. And basically what they want that to look like is when you push the fork into the item, it's actually going to fit between the tines of the fork. My boss and I did some measuring last week, and the average fork diameter, or the fork width, was 3 millimeters. So that's what we went with for the blade. 4 works fine. You can get one with this machine as well. What makes this unique is inside the top part of this cutter is I have a little gear type thing right here in the middle. And as this blade goes around, there's a little tang here. And as it hits that, it moves my hopper up here 45 degrees and then comes around for one more cut. So what this julienne blade does is it cuts a julienne and then it spins at 90 or 45 degrees and comes through and spins it again, hits it again, and causes that 3x3x3 cut. Culinary school used to call that sneeze garnish because it's so light that a little wind will take it across the table. So I have a hopper in here. Let it fall down. And this is my hopper that actually spins while it's rotating. So the key on this is I gotta have food that's make sure it's gonna fit in that hopper. If you're doing utility grade potatoes, it's not gonna happen. So we wanna get that in here. And as you see, this is spinning as it cuts. And as you see, we have a perfect 3x3 cut on that brunoise. Now, if I want to pay my ex-dishwasher, now my prep cook to do this, he's going to be there for 3 hours just getting one meal ready. So this is going to cut down on a ton of time. It's really nice if you're using peppers, zucchini, anything with color to really brighten that plate up. It's going to make a big difference to the diner's end experience. One more feature that the Blixer's fantastic for is getting proteins knocked down to a consistency that's ideal for our mince and moist or our pureed and our liquefied. So what we do is I'm going to run the ground process first, just pulse this a couple seconds and get it broken down to where it's consistent with that minced and moist. It's almost impossible to run the chicken through the brunoise. It just does not work. So we can get a ground consistency where I guarantee every piece in here is going to be below 14 or the 4 millimeter. So we just want to do a couple of pulses just to start the process of getting that broken down. And right about there, I don't need much. You start going further, you're going to get into more of a pureed consistency. But right here, what we're looking for is that ground consistency. So if I actually am doing 3 or 4 different plates, I can actually take what I need out of this for that minced and moist, maybe 1 or 2 items, and then go into my pureed process to kind of utilize all the time and effort you're putting into it. So at the pureed process, I'm going to get this, add a little bit of liquid just to get that actual puree going. You don't want a ton because every bit of water we put in here, we've got to add thickener to bring it back, which means we've diluted the nutrient content. And right here you can see the thickness of it. That's what makes that bowl scraper so important. And at this point I can actually have my pureed consistency. I've added very little water, so I don't have to add much thickener back to it, and I've retained the majority of my nutrients in this. At this point, I can actually liquefy this for my last phase of that diet to where it's going to be a drinkable product. So we'll just fire it back up. So at this point, it's pretty much almost like a milkshake. It's fairly drinkable. Probably a little bit thinner for that last level, just so it is something you can get out of a cup. And that's pretty much all it takes to get things broken down on a Blixer. And so here we basically have the finished product all the way from our level 7 ITSE all the way to our last one here. So the first one is just going to be your standard plate up. There's really no special instructions or qualifications, regulations on this. It's just your standard food. Definitely don't want to put chewy things on here on any menu. Obviously you don't want a horse steak or anything. And then we have our 7 EC. So this is 7 easy to chew. We got the chicken broken down a little bit. The carrots are a little softer. The baked potatoes a little more, I think it's twice baked at this point. And then our bite size, everything on here is 14 millimeter or smaller. So everything can be picked up with a fork, no cutting is involved or needed. And it's just a nicer plate up than just throwing it together. And here we've got our minced and moist. We've got our 3 millimeter potato, carrot, zucchini for color, and then the chicken is all broken down. We can actually, check this here where it actually goes through the tines of the fork just fine. Like I said, you're allowed up to 4 millimeter. This is 3, works just fine. And then we have our pureed, where it's basically just been pureed, and we have molds we put them in. And I like this a lot because I'll make 15 or 20 at a time, and then I can individually freeze them. So when those orders come out, I can just pull them out, put them on a plate, and I'm good to go. So you can see these potatoes, or the carrots, potatoes, even the chicken, it's all just pureed up. You can dig right in. And then with the final one, this is what we call liquefied. So this is basically like eating chowder or a bis. So it's just going to be just a liquefied diet. And this is everything that we have in here into one. Add a little garnish oil because we don't want to add dry parsley to this point. It'll add a choking danger.
In taking a look at the machines today, as Chef Dave was going through everything, one thing to keep in mind is some of the different features and capabilities of all of these units. Robocoupe has a CL series. We have the CL50 Gourmet, which can do a certain amount of poundage depending upon how many modified meals that you're doing. It also has the ability to do waffle cuts and brunoise that other pieces do not have the ability to do. The CL52 now will have a larger horsepower to it, which allows it to do more modified meals. The other thing as well is when we open these up and spin them out of the way, we'll see that the openings are different. The CL50 series has a kidney-shaped opening, which is about the size of my hand this way, where this has a circle opening about the size of my hand this way, and you can remove this unit to have even more space inside of it as well. The important part is making sure that we size your Robocoupe properly for the amount of modified diets that you need to do, especially with the CL series. Robocoupe 602VV has variable speed inside of it so that you can change the RPM depending on the product that you're using. The other really nice feature about this 3 horsepower unit is that you can take this salad chute off of here, and you can now work with a bowl on the same unit. So you have one base and 2 different features to be able to do multiple product inside of the unit. A big question that we get is why somebody would go with a Blixer over a food blender. Food blender, it works in a couple of different ways from a Blixer in that it either has a food stick to move the food around inside of it, or like this one, it has wave action where you don't need the food stick and the food will move around inside of it because of the aerodynamics of the unit. Something to remember with blenders is you have the short stubby blades inside of it, all the way down there. And that wave action inside of here will get the food moving around, but you have the short stubby blades at the bottom. When it comes to the Blixer, we have not just a longer blade, but we have more space between the blades. That allows for more food to be able to move around inside of here. And with these inverted blades here, that gets that food moving up and down with more space to move, this is going to grind your food down to a better puree than a blender will be able to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Richard and Dave, for that great presentation. We now have time for a few questions. As a reminder, if you're logged into your YouTube account, you can ask questions via the chat feature. Otherwise, you can submit questions using the Google link in the invite. Just be aware that the webinar moderator will be submitting questions that come over on the Google link to the screen.
Let's see, Dave, I think one of the questions we had was on proper maintenance of the Blixer and how often we have to change the blade. You want to go a little more in depth on that?
Sure. The blades are serrated on the Blixer, and it's difficult to sharpen a serrated blade, but we do have a stone that we can like kind of hone the bottoms of them. But those are replaceable. As far as the blades, the S blades go, typically they're just replaceable. The slicing blade on the slicers, though, with the CL model, basically we can buy a blade, take the screws out, and replace the blade without having to spend $160 on a brand new blade. I mean, we'd love to sell you one, but it's just the blade's the easiest way to fly.
So one of the questions is how large these machines get and how do I know what is best for my needs? So these machines do get to be quite large. For the Blixer, it goes up to the Blixer 60, which does almost 404-ounce portions at a time. So at that size, we're talking 404-ounce portions at a time. There's not many facilities that this isn't going to fit the needs for. And if you are doing more than that, then typically it's done in shifts, being rotated, going to the blast chiller, stored, ready to go. For your food processors, that we were discussing, like the CL series, that goes up to the CL 60 as well. Then you're talking almost 3,000 portions per service, and that definitely fits almost any facility's needs. So these machines do get to be quite huge. Depending on which one it is that you need is going to be dependent upon how many modified diets and the size that you're doing it, the food that you're doing inside of it, how many of those are you doing today? And what's your projection of growth over, say, the next decade or even 15 years? Because these can last quite a long time. We don't want you purchasing a piece of machinery and then growing out of it while it's still in perfect working order.
I guess one thing I was going to add on that don't just think about this as a healthcare thing, is that if you have an independent living dining room with 200 residents or 100 residents and you want to start doing pâtés or mousses or French buttercream, I mean, these can be used for more than just making puree. I mean, they're very useful, very versatile. So if you talk to your kitchen staff and they're like, can you find a reason that I would need something bigger than a 3? Well, maybe that 6 would fit in there. Even though you're only doing 3 portions of food, now you can use it for making duxelle for your beef Wellington or for making something like that, or emulsions. Mm-hmm. So I'll feel this one. You're probably in the looking at a Blixer 5 or a Blixer 6 for 30 processed meals. The big thing to keep in mind with this is 30 processed portions of one thing. So if I'm doing my potatoes, or I'm doing my chicken, and then I'm doing my vegetable, and then I'm doing my starch, and then I go up for breakfast the next day, I'm doing scrambled eggs and oatmeal and sausage, and then I'm doing dinner. It just has to keep up with a lot of flow. I have worked places where we have a blender, a Blixer, and a small food processor as well. So all 3 of those different textures we want to get to, we're only beating up one machine at a time.
Yep. And that CL50 Gourmet that we saw in the video and through the presentation would easily take care of that 30 meal need as well. Do the slicing discs need to be replaced, sharpened with continual use? This is a very good question. And usually 1A to this question is, how often does it have to happen? We'll start there. How often it has to happen depends on how much you're using it. How you're storing it is a big one. If it's just getting thrown into like a bin and it's bouncing around and that blade's getting hit, it's going to chip, it's going to dull much faster than something that is properly stored. And then the other big part about the question there is, does it need to be replaced or sharpened? There are certain discs, once you get into grade and everything else, that need to be completely replaced. But when we talk about something like the slicing disc, these are those 3 screws right here. Here. Well, you see the 3 screws. Those are the 3 screws that Dave had mentioned. Those screws can come out, and then this blade here can either be sharpened or it can be replaced, so you're not replacing the entire disc. Replacing this blade is far cheaper than replacing the disc. And then whatever your sharpening service is, or if you have access to a sharpening service, would be determined between whether you would sharpen it or you'd replace it. You could talk with your direct supply account manager about proper replacement blades on discs if you're in need of them. Changing the blade, we'll go back to how you store it, what you're using inside of it, how often you're using it, how you're cleaning it. Again, if you're using a caustic cleaner, it will eat away at the edge of the blade much faster than a non-caustic cleaner will. So we've seen blades get changed, to put it more quantitative. We've seen blades get changed every 6 months. We've seen blades get changed every couple years. Probably the fastest we've ever seen blades get changed is once a month because they're just doing such high volume.
Yeah, like Richard was saying, there's a CL60 machine that I've only seen one out in operations in the past couple of years, and that was at a school doing 4,000 meals for students, and they do all their veg prep through it, and that's just a lot of wear and tear on any piece of equipment. But typically, if they're taken care of, and that's the caveat, they got to be taken care of, because Richard and I have both seen places we walk in and there's a utility drawer that usually has tongs and pancake flippers, and it's got 6 blades jammed in there next to a tenderizing hammer. So it's all about ownership and taking care of your stuff, and that goes with anything.
Are there any other parts besides the seal and blade that may need to be replaced? We've seen the plastic lids get dropped or mishandled, misused, and those have cracked. Usually with RoboCoo, because they're built for such industrial strength, when things need to get replaced, it's simply because of the breakdown through continuous use or not properly handled. But on RoboCoos, stuff doesn't typically just break. It's very rare. I think we have less than 1% warranty rates on them.
Yeah. So the little pieces like I was talking about, the bowl scraper here, if this starts to get worn down, if you're using that Blixer a ton, or the little rubber seal, the scraper on top, and then of course the lid gasket. Richard mentioned sometimes the lids get jammed up. If you got a high temp dish machine and this is going into a 3-compartment sink, or going through the machine and then do a 3-compartment sink where some pots are getting dropped on it, eventually something on here is going to break. It's usually this little tang here that allows the machine to be operable. So it's all about having your staff have ownership of the product.
Yeah. I mean, talk to your direct supply account manager. If you're in need of replacement parts, that should be your first stop, is your direct supply account manager. There are training videos available. They're out there on YouTube. They're on RoboCoo's website. There's all different ways that you can get training. And again, talk to your direct supply account manager. There might be opportunities out there for something beyond training videos to help make sure that you're using your equipment properly and cleaning, maintaining, and operating.
Excellent. So I saw the last question. That looks like it's for me. What the cool thing is that link that you all use today to access the video is an evergreen link. So you're more than welcome to share that with your staff, and the video will be available to watch at your leisure. So I want to thank everyone for the great questions, and also thank Richard and Dave for their expertise and their time. That wraps up everything that we have for you today. If you have any additional questions on the items that are discussed, feel free to email me directly at tina.burns@directsupply.com. Have a great day.